In this video, I'm going to share with you 4 cold outreach campaigns that work in 2026. We'll look at real examples on my screen with real results. In this video, I'll even show you the campaign that led Lemlist to feature me on their website. Because in fact, it was a campaign with exceptional results, over 80% open rate and 61% response rate, even though we reached out to nearly 500 contacts. I'm saving the best for last. We'll look at it as number 4. And I'll show you a variety of examples so you can see that it works in different scenarios, whether it's targeting corporate clients in large groups or targeting small local businesses, whether it's an innovative startup making hardware in medtech or a service company that has absolutely nothing to set itself apart. Before I share these campaigns with you, let me introduce myself. My name is Antoine Thoreau. I'm the co-founder of the B2B Ninja training programs. We help B2B companies sign more clients, thanks to cold outreach, AI, and go-to-market engineering. All right, let's get started. We're kicking things off strong with the campaigns you see here. So I'm not going to take the first line out of intellectual honesty, even though it has a positive response rate of 39%, which is huge, but there are only 20 contacts in that batch, so it's too small to be meaningful. But I'll take the one just below, which is much more significant, where we already have 174 contacts. And here we get a positive response rate of 19%, it's huge, and so I'm going to give you an overview of this campaign. I see 3 reasons for its success. This is a campaign that was carried out by my business partner, so kudos to him. So on top of that, it allows me to analyze it with an outsider's perspective. To give a bit of context, we're talking about a startup that creates hardware in the healthcare sector. So it's medtech aimed at gynecologists, and we're targeting Switzerland. So the fact that we're targeting Switzerland doesn't really impact the results of this campaign. It's simply a strategic choice made by our client in relation to the market and the income level in that market, which makes it possible to move toward the product they're offering, which as of today is not reimbursed by social security systems. So if we look at the campaign, the first thing, in my opinion, that explains its success is that we created an excellent database. I'm giving us a bit of credit here, but it really wasn't that simple. For this particular client, because we're dealing with doctors, so either independent practitioners or healthcare professionals working in hospitals. And when it comes to collecting the data, it's not nearly as straightforward as when you have a typical target in companies where you can use enrichment tools that you probably know, and actually the professional email is easy to find and so on. No, in this case, it was nothing like that at all. So we had to combine different data sources, specialized databases, Google, Maps, LinkedIn, we combined everything. We also used AI to find as many email addresses as possible. As you can see, here we have a mix of personal email addresses and sometimes generic ones. So someone who only does corporate might say, oh wow, what are these generic addresses? But as I already mentioned, for small businesses or for those who help, actually, in this specific case, these addresses produced great results because even though they're generic, they're managed either by the doctor themselves or by a secretary. And so actually, these are really addresses that are read and used. And I want to share this advice or encouragement with you. Generally speaking, the harder it is to scrape and enrich a database for a specific use case, the more interesting it becomes afterwards. Because if it's difficult, it means that these people are less solicited than in other markets, in other sectors, at least through the channel of cold outreach. So generally speaking, it's worth the effort. It's better to spend a little more time, build a solid database. You also need to have the right skills, of course. And I hope this channel helps you get familiar with all these aspects, but it's really worth it. So that was the first point. The second point I want to say is that it's not thanks to the Sendo agency. And that's a very important point. In reality, we're somewhat agnostic regarding the maturity of the companies we support and their product market fit. That is to say, a company that hasn't found its product market fit, whether it uses cold outreach, Google Ads, or any other acquisition channel, the results will inevitably be mediocre. Now, if a company has really nailed its product market fit and found its messaging fit, meaning it knows exactly how to address its market and precisely whom in a very targeted way, and knows what to say to them, then overall, regardless of the acquisition channels, it will generally be profitable in its acquisitions. And from my point of view, that's exactly what happened here. And this is where, on the one hand, if we work with clients who don't give us all the cards, we can be limited, but at the same time, we can help them find product market fit. Because with cold outreach, we can create segments. And precisely, in a very quick way, with exceptional speed, we can see whether it works or not, depending on the targets and the messages, the pain points addressed. In short, all this to say that here, we're dealing with entrepreneurs, I'd say talented ones, who have done their job well and are actually offering something innovative. in a market that is probably a bit outdated because gynecology, well, there isn't regular innovation in this market, but they are coming in with something that's actually quite rare on the international market. For me, that's what also explains why this target audience responded so well. The third point is the copywriting, which is well executed, and we'll see that right away. I didn't mention it, but we're only using email here. So getting these response rates through email compared to, say, LinkedIn is all the more exceptional. We have 4 emails. At the end, we have fairly standard follow-ups. And if we look, I'll switch to mobile mode. If we look at the message, there's not a huge amount of personalization, but the personalization is already present in the fact that we're targeting a very specific audience. Gynecologist, look at the first sentence. As a gynecology expert, male or female, and here again, that's a small personalization, but it's all in the details. You know how much the insertion of an IUD can be a source of anxiety for your patients. Personally, IUD, I don't even know what that is. I don't know what it means, but the person we're talking to does. And actually, using jargon often immediately lends credibility to our approach because it shows we're among experts and we know what we're talking about. And there are several points in the sequence where we talk about jargon. We mentioned the IUD again here. We talk about the POSI forceps, which is a tool quite specific to this medical specialty. The CHAV, we also mention an institution that is local to Switzerland. So in fact, there is all this grounding in terms of specialization that lets us know we're among specialists. Secondly, throughout this sequence, which remains simple and straight to the point, the problem-solution pair is well positioned. Problem-solution, that is to say, you actually see that right away in the copywriting, we put our finger on a problem, the anxiety of patients. Because in fact, for a healthcare professional, well, I don't really know, I'm just assuming, but I imagine it's annoying for them to have to manage patients' anxiety. It probably takes more time out of their work schedule to deal with these aspects. A bit more on the psychological side rather than just performing the procedure and so on. And so here we're really trying to put ourselves in the shoes of these healthcare professionals by asking, how can we transform this experience? We introduce some figures, well, the numbers. Often that's also very effective by telling them, actually, this particular problem, we have a solution for it. And in fact, we've measured the source. It's up to us to demonstrate it later in the process. But 87% of patients are able to experience this pause without significant pain, which allows you to have a smoother and more predictable process. And we are result-oriented, results. And here, to touch again on psychology, we have more relaxed patients, easier pauses, so the procedure itself becomes easier to perform. It's easier to carry out and so on. And here, we'll even include a short quote, like a client testimonial, to get a concrete sense of what it's like in the field, what it can actually look like. So it's both simple and effective at the same time. It addresses a very specific issue, one that's well known and familiar to our target audience, and it immediately says, actually, we've developed a solution, and look, we have these results and this feedback. So there you have it, top-notch copywriting. And overall, I won't describe everything, but it's pretty much the same logic that we find in follow-up messages. So now, let's move on to the second example. And here, we're dealing with a company that's completely different. We're looking at a company operating in the French market that sells B2C, leads to businesses in the energy renovation sector, such as solar panel installation, heat pump installation, boilers, and so on. And what's interesting is that they have no differentiating factors at all. In fact, there are plenty of companies that sell this type of lead, that is, private individuals who own a home and have a concrete project to change their boiler or something similar. There are tons of them, an enormous number, and yet we achieved some amazing results. And I'm going to try to show you how right now. So same thing here. I'm not going to take the first row because the batch is a bit too small. But if you look at row 2 and row 3, we have 113 people with a positive interest rate of nearly 17%. Here, we have 284 people with 14%. So we're still seeing some really great rates, especially considering the size of the batches. So let's take this third row, for example. Here, we're using a multi-channel approach. And specifically, we split it into 2 branches. We go down the left branch when we know a verified email, and we go down the right branch when we don't have an email. So we use only the LinkedIn channel. As in the first video, one of the reasons, in my opinion, for the success of these campaigns is the way the database is built. Because in reality, we're targeting small businesses. Businesses that we can describe as brick and mortar. So these are companies of tradespeople in various professions, like plumbing, electricity, energy renovation, which vary in size. In fact, we have some fairly large companies because they are groups in France. And we also have very small ones with fewer than 10 employees that have very little presence on LinkedIn. So here as well, one of the challenges was to successfully enrich this database in a qualitative way. And we actually asked ourselves, where do we start from? What targeting do we use? Because in fact, a large part of our target audience wasn't on LinkedIn. Now, for example, should we go to the Sarin directory file to find the API codes? But in our case, the API codes were very scattered. If you like, there are a lot of them. There are plenty. There are codes for plumbing, for electricity, and so on. And so it's complicated to bring all of that together. A little hack we found, this alone doesn't explain the results of the campaigns, but it's that in the government's Siren database with the OP source, we have a filter that allows us to keep only companies that are RGE certified, meaning that they actually enable their clients to receive government assistance. The grants, Renault with its, so that, for example, was a great way to qualify. So the first reason is that we managed to reach the right people, even if it's more complicated than a typical corporate target. The second reason, in my opinion, is that our copywriting, once again, hits the mark. And here, intentionally, you shouldn't go into anything too complex or things that are a bit too clever or a bit too polished. No, you have to stick to something transactional because their job is transactional. And so, if I show you what the first email looks like, it's a message that's pretty straightforward and at the same time, personalized to show that we understand what this entrepreneur does. So we have a first element of personalization that you can see here. We say, if I understood correctly, I summarize the company's activity by including the company name in a way that cleans it up. This is generated with AI. And then we add a sentence here that you see in green because that's also a variable. Is it correct that you operate around machine? And actually, we have very specific cities depending on where the company is located. So this already allows us to show that we're not off the mark, that we're not generalists, that if we ask them, are you really based around this city? Nanclis, Saint-Amour, probably. We can do business there. We can get leads there. And another element of personalization that they might not necessarily see here, but which is hard-coded because we've created different segments. We are going to talk to them about potential qualified prospects related to their specific line of work. The campaign we just saw earlier, with nearly 17% interest, is about bathrooms, bathroom renovations, especially for PRM, people with reduced mobility, etc. We mentioned this right in the first or second sentence to show that specifically we understand what their specialty is and that we can provide them with leads for projects of that type. There you go. And we take the opportunity to include references for reassurance and credibility with company names that are rather big names in the sector by poking a little at the idea that maybe these are your competitors, implying that they have our leads so they can find the best projects, the best clients. And so maybe it would be interesting for you to also see what we can offer you. In this version, we're very basic. So sometimes we also emphasize the fact that we had too many leads in the region, that we're able to dynamically redistribute them here to actually move the B2C leads of our own client, which was the case, to tell them, honestly, the fit is good. We have too many leads. You're in the region, you do this kind of activity where we can find projects for you. So are you interested in learning more? And we varied the calls to action. And it was either fairly standard contact requests or calls to action like, look, I have 20 leads, 30 leads as a sample. I can send them to you. Thank you, to show you what it looks like and to give you an idea. So those are basically the elements that, in my opinion, made this campaign successful. Third campaign, which is also delivering exceptional results for our client. Now, the rates of interest and positive responses are less impressive than what I showed you before, but they're still well above the industry average. And those are already very good scores, especially since for this client, we're dealing with much higher average order values. We're talking tens of thousands of euros, and we're in the automotive sector. So you see, if maybe quickly, I'll show you the kind of appointments we're getting. For example, we have appointments with people at Maserati. We're in the automotive industry. We have meetings with Aston Martin and so on. So we're talking about major groups. And as soon as we're dealing with large groups, we know that the responses, both positive responses and responses in general, are inevitably fewer than with mid-sized companies. So achieving this level for this target is already excellent. The first reason why, in my opinion, we have such great results here is, once again, thanks to targeting. In any case, without high-quality targeting, it's quite rare to get good results afterwards. But here, why is that? The targeting was excellent with this client, and I can't share it with you. Obviously, there are documents that are confidential, but this is one of the clients who came in at the launch of the campaigns with something more structured and, from my point of view, a greater maturity regarding his target audience. And he had really made the effort in an Excel document. Very simple, but with lots of segments, segmenting both the companies, so the car manufacturers, really the big names we all know, the major brands, etc., the suppliers and the solutions that are more specialized in what he offers. And then he listed dozens and dozens of job titles that he thought might need the product he was selling. The first campaign we launched is the one that actually gives the best results because he knew very well that those people would be very interested in his product. If we look at, who knows, I'll put the job titles somewhere. In their job titles, we systematically find keywords like ADAS and DMS. So those are two acronyms that we might not know, but if you're in the industry, you're very familiar with them. And in fact, having identified this precisely, seeing those in their job titles tells us that they are exactly working on the topics addressed by this product. So we know that this specifically falls within their job description and their scope. So to finish, we're going to move on to the last campaign I mentioned to you at the beginning. A campaign that allowed me to be featured on the AimList website. The results were so exceptional. As you can see, out of a batch of about 450 prospects, we got 80, an open rate and a 61% response rate, so an absolutely mind-blowing response rate. And from that, we got 19 meetings that were scheduled. And we're talking about meetings for this client that can bring in contracts worth several tens of thousands of euros or even over 100,000 euros per contract, because we're dealing with a company that integrates treasury systems, cash management, and corporate finance solutions for very large groups. They place consultants, sometimes several at a time, so the amounts quickly add up to tens of thousands of euros. Quick side note, I had a bug while recording this video and the sound completely cut out. So I have no more audio. So now I'm carefully re-recording the audio, trying to match the timing as precisely and closely as I possibly can to the footage I had taken. So I apologize for that. In any case, this campaign is working. You can actually see, especially in this first email, the art of keeping things simple. That's really the philosophy. Less is more. We're dealing with a very short message and an extremely short subject line. What I need to explain to you is what the AFT is. You can see that's the subject of the email. What is the AFT? It's an acronym that obviously doesn't mean anything to you. And you need to know the context of this client to understand what it is. It's the French Association of Corporate Treasurers. And our batch, who is it made up of? Of members of this association. So obviously we're talking about people who are in a professional association with a paid annual membership. So to make it worthwhile generally, they're all active, they all know the AFT, they know exactly what it is, there are events, etc. So the first thing to remember is that if you too have this kind of presence, let's say physical, local, or associative, and by associative I mean in a professional sense, well, I encourage you to rely on it to use outreach, and you'll see that the results will be much better than what you can achieve with cold outreach, without this kind of context, let's say. And so the first thing that explains this exceptionally high open rate is simply this intriguing subject line. They all know the FTE. The subject line was simply AFT. It sparked a lot of curiosity because I imagine people wanted to see what it was about and didn't want to miss potentially important information regarding the FTE. Next, this first email, as you can see, is very short. By the way, it's in English. The Amnesty team translated it. But the campaign in French, we say, here it is. I saw that you are a member of the FTE. Well, so am I, and you surely know the publisher, Kiribati. So here as well, let me make a little aside. Kiribati, it's a software solution for corporate treasury, and it's the world leader. It's impossible not to know it. Basically, when you're in the business, so, the publisher Kiribati, with whom we've been a long-time partner, do you use their SaaS version at company name? Quite simply. And it's this little question that actually sparked so many responses and generated discussions. The idea behind it was that those who said no, I don't use it at all, Kiribati, whether it's the SaaS version or the on-premise version, for us, those weren't interesting leads. And we could update the CRM by saying, these ones aren't using Kiribati. So maybe they'll switch vendors one day, but for now, my client couldn't do business with them because he only works by integrating Kiribati. Now, for those who say, yeah, I use Kiribati, that allowed us to start a conversation about things like, for example, they're on-premise, but want to move to SaaS, or they're already using the SaaS version. At that point, there won't be any possible integration for my client, but there are always optimization topics. And as an expert, he can still sell other services. And so that's what allowed us to achieve such a high response rate. That's where most of the campaign played out. Let's be honest, it's really the first email. Next, regarding the second email, there are actually 2 inaccuracies in what Lemnis shows on their site. I don't know why. First of all, the second email wasn't sent one day later, as you can see. In their little preview, it was sent a few days later. Here, it's them who misconfigured their example. And there was a third email, which was a so-called breakup email to wrap things up. But this second email is extremely long, which goes against the best practices you've probably already heard here and there, telling you to write very short emails. But that was intentional. I made the choice to write this email that way. A bit in the style of a copywriter, weaving a whole story and relying on my client's strengths, that is, his expertise, his long-standing presence in the market, and the fact that he himself had an entire career as a corporate treasurer before starting his own company. And so that's what we explain in this email. We explain what his transition was and why. Why then? He wanted to serve corporate treasurers by creating his own firm, how he does it, and the fact that he launched his firm in 2004. So he has a great deal of seniority and experience in this market. Those are overall the key points that allowed us to achieve these exceptional results and generate a sales pipeline worth several €100,000 just with this campaign. There you go. You've now seen 4 concrete and real examples. I hope this has helped you understand what works, how to target, and how to write sequences that convert. And if you enjoyed this content, support me by giving it a like and, most importantly, by subscribing to the channel. That's the most important thing. But all of this is just the beginning. If you want to go further and collect thousands of emails or phone numbers from qualified prospects, I have videos that show you exactly how to do it. If you're wondering when to prioritize email and when to prioritize LinkedIn, I also have a complete video to help you choose the right channel according to your goals. So take a look around the channel and keep getting your hands dirty to boost your outreach starting today. See you soon.